You ever look at a dummy DPS test and think, yeah, but you can't get numbers like that on a real boss? We've all thought that, and even though it's technically wrong, damage can actually go higher in trials. The basic idea is bang on. Dummy tests and boss fights are different. Depending on how experienced and organized your group is, they might be very different. That doesn't mean dummy tests are pointless. No, what works on the dummy should work in content, but it's up to us to fill in the gaps. Welcome to Ninja Pulls. My name is Khan, we do DPS guides, prog groups and teaching trials. And I've got 5 things that will increase your damage in group content, specifically trials. 1. Minor Slayer. Most players know this, but it's an easy one, so it goes first. Wear a set with Minor Slayer. You only get that from trial sets or the Oakensole ring. Oakensole can work for trials, especially if you're just starting out, but almost all the buffs it gives you are covered by a trial group anyway, so all it's doing is heroism and empower. Aegis, mending and protection too, but we don't really need those. Solo setups are not the way to approach trials. You gather all the buffs you can and apply them group-wide, not individually. Minor Slayer is the rare buff that doesn't work like that, it can only be self-applied. Plus, it's free damage, and the higher your damage goes, the more valuable it becomes. But if you don't have any trial sets, don't worry too much. It's not as if you can't do good damage without Minor Slayer, it's just a very easy stat boost, and we'd be fools not to take it when we can. 2. Penetration. This one is important. All enemies have an armor stat, 9.1k in Overland, 18.2k in dungeons and trials, which mitigates our damage against them by 1% for every 500 armor. With 0 pen, only about 64% of our damage gets through. Even if you're only 5k short, 10% of your damage still goes in the bin. It matters. There's no magic amount of pen you need to bring. On the dummy, it's only 1.2k. But for casual trials, you might need 3, 4, or even 5k. The more experienced the group, the less pen you should need. You should always have Major and Minor Breach on the bosses. If tanks are prepped, you should have Crusher and a Crimson proc as well. That's 14.5k armor gone, even more with Alkosh, Runic Sunder, or Crystal Weapon, but you can't always rely on those. Anyway, with those debuffs, there's 3.6k left over, and we can get there with the Piercing CP, Light Armor Pieces, the Ur-Mage Mythic if you're an Arcanist or Templar, and if you're still short, the Force of Nature CP, a Sharpened Front Bar, Maces, Krag, Scoria, Baylorg, plus class passives, set bonuses, and all the rest. You'll almost certainly need a little extra in trash pulls, but don't worry about getting full pen on everything, just the priority targets. And try to avoid going above the target's armor, you'll get no additional benefit and the stat will be wasted. Like I said, there's no magic number, just talk to your group or check uptimes yourself on priority targets. They don't have to be perfect, but if you bring dummy pen to a trial group where debuffs are missing, you are going to miss out on a ton of damage. Nothing to do with you or your build per se, you just have to adjust. This is probably the biggest reason for the massive gaps between dummy damage and boss damage that many players see. Even in organized groups, you'll get fights now and then that feel really slow, and when you check, you'll find that one of these pen debuffs is missing. It happens all the time. It's arguably the most important damage stat, so you have to know how it works and how to adjust your setup around it. 3. Critical damage. This one is pretty simple but often poorly understood. In ESO, a critical hit deals 1.5 times the damage of a regular hit at no extra costs, 50% bonus, so we want our critical strike chance to be nice and high. Simple. The critical damage stat raises that 50% bonus up to a maximum of 125%, so your critical hits deal 2.25 times the damage of a regular hit. A 20k hit becomes a 45k crit instead, a massive increase. If you weren't sure why DDs are so obsessed with crit damage, now you know. It's why damage builds typically include Minor Force, 5 to 7 medium armor pieces, the Kilt, except sometimes when the class already has a crit passive. That's 30%, potentially more, plus the default 50%, so we're at 80, plus Major Force, Minor Brittle, Loosen Echoes or Elemental Catalyst. And we're at the cap. Crit is easier than pen in some ways, but maybe your supports are new and they don't have sets collected, or they just don't realize how important these things are. If that's the case, or you can't run the Kilt or whatever, again, it's up to you to make up the difference with things like Backstabber, Fighting Finesse, Sulzan, and Axes. I know it can be hard to fiddle with this stuff in the middle of a trial, especially if you're not on voice. Best to figure it out or make an educated guess beforehand. But don't sweat it too much, these things probably won't stop you from clearing. Just being aware of pen and crit is going to raise your damage and make you way more valuable to your teammates. 4. Champion points. First, make sure you're using the right damage type CPs. What percentage of your damage is direct versus over time, and how much is single target versus AoE. If the balance is close to 50-50, then slotting the wrong CP makes very little difference. But if it's 60-40 or further apart, then yeah, it matters. For example, a lot of players see Necromancer and think it's the AoE dot class, so Biting Aura, Thaumaturge, done. When in fact a Runecarver Necro is predominantly single target direct damage, and they rob themselves of 2% DPS or whatever by not checking this. And it changes from fight to fight. We're not talking major gains, but every little helps, and it's free damage, so be smart. Exploiter is another one. Great on the dummy because it automatically gets off balance on cooldown. That's a 3% damage increase. And in organized groups, it'll be someone's job to proc off balance. But if no one's doing it or they're not doing it consistently, Exploiter isn't worth it and you'd be better off with something else, like the 3rd highest damage type CP for example. And we already talked about Force of Nature, Backstabber, etc. and slotting the right ones for the group you're in. Green CPs don't make much difference, but don't forget about the reds. You can't go far wrong with Boundless Vitality, Fortified, Rejuvenation and Celerity. But if there are adds in the fight, Bloody Renewal or Siphoning spells can be amazing for sustain. Tumbling if you're dodging a lot, Bracing Anchor if you're blocking a lot, and Wardmaster if your group is using barriers to survive heavy damage phases. None of this raises your damage directly, but if you die, that is a massive DPS loss, not just for you, but the DD who has to stop and res you. That's 25% group DPS gone for that time. So anything that helps you keep alive without gimping your damage is worth keeping in mind. Same goes for food. If you are able to sustain food with max health, go ahead and use it, just in case. If the fights are really long or your supports aren't great, you can always change it back. 5. Trash setups. Don't just bring one setup. Boss fights may be similar to dummy testing, but trash pulls are not. Rather than sustained single target damage, you want something with a lot of AoE punch and ideally some burst damage to clear dangerous ad packs fast. Sometimes these are the most dangerous bits in the trial. So many elite ads are a pain in the ass the longer they stay alive. Bulwarks in Kind's Aegis, Reavers and Soulweavers in Rockgrove, Disruptors in Sanity's Edge. The last thing your tanks and raid leads want to see is you tickling them to death one by one. No, nuke 'em. I guess it's fine if you have a setup that kind of works everywhere, like an Arcanist with Riptide and Deadly, especially if you're on console, but it's so much better to have a separate trash setup, so see what you've got. Master's Greatsword, Inferno Staves, Whirling Blades, Fiery Rage, all that kind of stuff. And if you have no idea where to start, check out my mini guides. I make 14, 2 for every damage class every patch, including a trash setup for each one. You can go a step further and have a mechanical acuity setup as well. We've got a whole separate video on trash setups in the pipeline, so keep an eye out for that if you're interested in getting better at this. It is a massively underrated part of the damage dealer's job, and it's a lot of fun to deal millions and millions of damage in a matter of seconds. Now I really want you guys to share this video anywhere it might be helpful. Anywhere people are doing trials, there will be players missing this stuff and bumming out over their damage. And this is an easy fix. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, we're grateful for any support in making Ninja Pulls a bigger and better resource for you guys, and there's a lot more coming. Maya is also streaming every day in May on Twitch and YouTube, so tune into that. Take care, and thanks for watching.